Good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming to the Elections and Redistricting Committee hearing for May 9th, 2018. There are 5 bills up in our committee today. 3 bills, item number 1, AB 2559, item number 2, AB 2665, and item number 3, AB 2835, are on consent, as well as item number 5, AB 3259 by the Elections and Redistricting Committee, as proposed to be amended as suggested in comment number 7 of the committee analysis. Does any member wish to? But we don't have a quorum, so we're not going to take a vote on that yet. But we do have an author, so why don't we get started? Dr. Arambula, if you'd like to present item number 4, I believe, AB 2839.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. AB 2839 simply states that the voting domicile for a person who is classified as a sexually violent predator and who is committed for an indeterminate term in a state hospital shall be the person's last known address of residence. This bill will ensure that an SVP votes in the county and/or city where he or she last lived before they were convicted of their sex offense, instead of the city and county where the state hospital is located. Court rulings have granted SVPs the right to vote. This measure clarifies where an SVP's voting domicile is. Existing law provides that a person does not gain or lose a domicile solely by reason of his or her presence or absence from a place while being kept in an asylum or prison. This bill just clarifies that the voting domicile for SVPs. There are approximately 950 sexually violent predators in California that have been committed for indeterminate terms. All of them are housed at Coalinga State Hospital in Fresno County. Most of them, if not all of them, have no history of living in Fresno County or in the city of Coalinga. Last year, the Coalinga City Council placed a measure on the ballot that would have increased the sales tax by 1%. The sales tax that's needed to address a budget deficit that would have allowed the city to retain 23 city positions, maintaining police officer and firefighter staffing levels. The measure went before the voters in November of 2017, and the sales tax measure failed by 37 votes, 582 to 545. According to the city, most of the state hospital's 304 registered voters voted against the tax. As a result, the city was forced to cut 23 positions and to reduce the police force by 25%. The SVPs that voted against the ballot measure have absolutely no ties to Coalinga and no understanding of what the community needs. Instead, they made unreasonable demands for a shuttle service to the institution, access to taxi services, and land for a visitor center, all things that they can't utilize. It is unfortunate that the sexually violent predators at State Hospital were able to affect the outcome of an issue so important to the community, public safety. Their votes impacted the jobs of 23 police officers and firefighters in a city that desperately needs them. The SVPs are being housed at Coalinga State Hospital by court order, and most, if not all of them, have never lived and probably never even visited Coalinga before being sent to the state institution. This measure simply ensures that the SVPs housed at Coalinga are voting in communities that they have some ties to, and not the community that they were sent to by court order. I ask for your aye vote. I have with me 3 witnesses, Mayor Nathan Vosburg from the city of Coalinga, but we also have Susan Fox from ACAPS, who's not here yet.
Great, and if we can just take a brief pause. As we have a quorum, we're going to go ahead and take a roll to establish a quorum in the committee. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Berman?
Here.
Berman here. Harper?
Present.
Harper here. Calderon? Here. Calderon here. Lowe?
Here.
Lowe here. Mullen? Steinorth? Steinorth here. Weber? We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Please continue.
Mayor Vosburg.
My name is Nathan Vosburg, Mayor of the City of Coalinga. I come from a small disenfranchised community. Our population from 2010 census was 1338. We have a state hospital. We had a prison, Claremont Custody Center. That custody center was giving us $1 million of revenue to go to public safety. Due to AB 109, Prop 4757, we have lost that, and so we've lost also the revenue that came in with it, which actually put our city about $4 million in debt. As you know, about 12 to 15 years ago, our council did vote in favor of making a deal with the hospital to bring them in for jobs and opportunity. At that point in time, it's to my understanding that the SVPs were not able to vote in our local elections at that time. I was actually against bringing in the state hospital. Along with a lot of our community members were against it. We figured it would bring a bad element, but jobs and opportunities in an impoverished area that's disadvantaged, highly disadvantaged in some areas, overrode that, and we moved forward with it, and it is one of the top job providers there. However, everyone says not in my backyard. Coalinga allowed this in our backyard, and we have done everything that the state has asked us. We had the custody center for the state. We had the state hospital for the state, and unfortunately, a lot of these things that we're doing have actually come back to bite us. The state hospital severed the ties with our hospital. So they no longer take inmates or anybody over to that area, patients, and so we now have lost our hospital as well. So we were in $4 million in debt. We're climbing our way out. Our police and fire, because of Prop 47 and 57, AB 109, have been completely overwhelmed. We have reoffenders. It's amazing to see it. They get out from doing a crime, they commit another crime, our officers take them to Fresno, they're out before our officers get home. So this is a constant deal that we're dealing with. So we're trying to get more officers on the street. I ran against taxes. I'm not a tax guy. I got in defeating Measure P. As soon as I got in and seen the $4 million that we were in the hole, I said, hey, we need to do something. So we put a half-cent sales tax on there. We had priorities for what this sales tax was going to go for. I had no clue that the SVPs could vote until we got a letter from DACE, and they had a list of demands that were not in line with our priorities. As you guys know, cities are not permitted to use city staff or city time to go out and lobby on something on behalf. We can only tell exactly what the priority list was, which we did send them back, that priority list. They were unhappy with that, so all of them, well, the majority of them voted against our measure. To begin with, hey, citizens voted, I did not know that the majority of the no votes came from that area. Once we did some research, because I wanted to find out exactly where the votes came from that said no, because I thought, we had about a 50% rate in all areas. When we found out that the state hospital area was 71% and against this, and all of the rest of our districts were about 50%, we've seen this sway, so we started looking at the law. Are the people out there allowed to vote? So we started specifically looking at the domicile law, section 349, where it states that they're supposed to be fixed, their intent to remain, and their intent to return if in absence. I see that probably two of these things, that there is absolutely no capability for them to return to that if they are absent from that scenario. And none of those people are from Coalinga. So I think the current law, as it sits, is a good law, but I think it needs to be clarified. We're currently going to court because we challenged those votes based on Election Code 349 and Section 2025. Nothing against the people out there at all. However, I can tell you that our communities are livid. The whole Central Valley is unhappy with this. On my way up here, I asked people what they thought about, the SVPs being allowed to vote. I didn't even hear one person say that they should be allowed to vote, period, much less in our local elections. And when they heard that they swung our tax, people were really unhappy about that. So I think this is a minority amount of people that definitely need their voting rights protected, but I'd like to see our citizens protected at the same time. And Coalinga, housing all of a lot, or if not all of these SVPs, I think that this is. How did my Uber driver on the way here put it? He said, this is unintended consequences. And so I just like to figure out how it is that we can fix these unintended consequences. In the city of Coalinga, that's very easy to do. We go back to our, the people come to us, we make amendments to our laws, we make amendments to our bills, we fix those things. In Sacramento, I'm here to do that exact thing, and I'm hoping that you guys will, look at the scenario and say, hey, Coalinga has done a lot for the state. We're just trying to move forward with these things, and that, the current law as it sits is very clear, but we're asking to support AB 2839 in support of the Arambla bill, and I thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Ron Ramsey, City Council Member from Coalinga.
Great.
Hello, the Election Committee. My name is Ron Ramsey. I'm the City Councilman from the City of Coalinga, and I'm also Treasurer of ACAP. It's Area California Cities Allied for Public Safety. And we jumped right onto this as ACAP. There's about 20 cities all over the state that are looking at this. We're looking at all aspects of this stuff. We're looking at the domicile, too. A person who, I think you all know this, so I'm just repeating it, but a person who leaves his or her domicile or her home to go into another precinct for temporary purpose with the intent of returning does not lose their domicile. Similarly, a person does not gain a domicile in any precinct in which he or she comes to for a temporary purpose without intending to make the precinct his or her home. To acquire a new domicile, there must be both intent to acquire a new domicile and the act of removal. A person does not gain a domicile because of his or her presence in that place, and becoming an inmate is or an asylum or a prison. Along these same lines, it has been recognized that the presence of a military station without more cannot be a station where the serviceman's domicile is, because the serviceman is subject to the orders of their superior officers. In A Marriage of Thornton's, 1982, there's a whole string of here cases on it. Similarly, in the case of patient voters or under a court order here, they're committed. They have no control of their freedom of where they can live. So they don't have an intent. So they have to go where they're told to. So they don't have the power to change that until they do. They can. We don't care if they vote, but they shouldn't be able to vote from where they are, because it changes all the time. Sometimes they're taken out of the hospital and taken to other places. So that's not a permanent domicile for them. I just retired from the corrections, and I worked at the state hospital, and I worked at the state prison both, and I was in transportation. And we did transfer them both places. And if the serviceman can't have a domicile at his airbase, why can an inmate or a patient have a domicile at their prison? It's not right. If a serviceman can't do it, why can a convicted criminal or a person that's in there to see if they're going to recommit, why should they have the same rights? And with that, I would like you to vote for his bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any additional witnesses in support?
Good morning, Suzanne Fox, Association of California Cities Allied with Public Safety, in support.
Thank you.
Good morning, Tanya Stoltz, Mayor Pro Tem Coalinga, in support.
Thank you very much. Seeing no additional witnesses in support, any witnesses in opposition?
Maya Ingram, legislative attorney with the ACLU of California. Good morning, and we are here in respectful opposition. We understand and empathize with the funding issues in Coalinga, and we understand that the constituency here might not be the most sympathetic population, but we think changing the voting rights of just one constituency based on the outcome of one election is unsound public policy. It's important to note that this bill only targets one set of patients at the state hospital, not those who have been adjudicated a sexually violent predator, not the other patients that reside there. It's important to note that these are patients. They are civilly committed, not criminally committed. They've already served their criminal sentence, and like many others who have criminal convictions in this state, they have voting rights afterwards, as long as they meet the other voting criteria. It's also important to note that these are lengthy civil commitments. As the analysis points out, since 2006, about 1,000 of these patients have been committed to the state hospital, and a dozen years later, 80% of them remain there. So they're in this hospital for a significant amount of time. Under current law, they can register to vote in the communities that they can reside from, but this bill only limits them to that region. And we think that's unsound public policy. That's not where they live. They're not being impacted by the local decisions of elected officials. Their address may not physically exist anymore. They've already served a criminal sentence. Now they have a lengthy civil commitment. Significant time has passed. They may no longer have family or community ties to the region they came from. And it's also important to note that the city did make a choice here. They chose to annex the hospital, and that created tax benefits for the city, but it also gave patients at that hospital the right to vote in that area. And now we understand the dissatisfaction with these election results, but fundamentally changing the voting rights of those individuals as the result of one close election, we think is an unsound course for the state to take. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Berman. Good morning, Vice Chairman Harper, and members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to speak in opposition to AB 2839. My name is Janice Bellucci, and I'm a civil rights attorney. I'm also executive director of the Alliance for Constitutional Sex Offense Laws, which is a nonprofit that's comprised of over 105,000 California residents and families. My testimony today, by the way, is in addition to my letter submitted to the committee that's dated April 25th. As currently written, AB 2839 would disenfranchise hundreds of California citizens who are patients at Coalinga State Hospital. While it's true that about 75% of the patients have been designated as sexually violent predators, it's also true that state law has declared and case law has determined that all patients who are not on parole are eligible to vote. In fact, their eligibility to vote is not at issue in AB 2839, but what is at issue in the bill is where eligible patients may vote. Currently, patients are allowed to choose their own domicile. This has been established by case law for students, for military members, prisoners, etc. And because of that, the patients often make their choice based upon where they will be directly affected. Most patients at Coalinga State Hospital who are eligible to vote have chosen the city of Coalinga as their domicile, and that's because most have lived at the hospital 10 years or longer, and they are also directly affected by issues such as the city's sales tax, which they pay when they purchase food, clothing, and electronics at the hospital's retail outlets. They've chosen the city of Coalinga because they no longer have ties to the last known address before they were committed to the hospital. And if they tried to vote at their last known address, it's doubtful that they could even qualify as voters in that community. The fact is that at least 95% of the patients at Coalinga State Hospital will live at the hospital until they die. 95%. If they are not allowed to vote in the city of Coalinga, they will suffer taxation without representation. For these reasons, we urge you all to vote no on AB 2839. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Hello, committee. My name is Robert Turner. I come from Fresno, California. I lived at the state hospital as a patient for 6 years and was released unconditionally with $50 to my name, ended up in a homeless shelter in Fresno. I'm currently working with the Internal Revenue Service there, so I'm doing okay. I was the community liaison for the Detaining Americans for Civic Equality, or DACE. In the run-up prior to the election, I was the intermediary who was talking to the city manager and communicating between them and the patients in the hospital. 55% of the 322 registered voters of the hospital cast a ballot, compared to 21% in the city. Even so, 50 of the 177 patients who voted were for the measure. So many of the patients were sympathetic to the city's needs and voted in favor of the tax measure. While it's true that the patient vote tipped the balance against the tax increase, it is seldom mentioned that without the patient vote, the measure would have only barely passed by 40 votes in the city without the hospital votes. It did not have the overwhelming support of the city. And yet the hospital patients have been scapegoated for Measure C's loss, and the city is suing in court to disqualify the patients' votes and reverse the result of the election so they can have their tax monies. Patients pay sales tax on purchases at the hospital. This would add just a penny to the dollar. It's true, and this is being characterized as pennies on a hamburger cost. But and the people do like to, and the patients do like to go to the grill. They prefer that to the cafeteria fare in many cases. So a lot of money is spent there. Many of the patients only get $12.50 a month. That's their allowance. Other patients get money sent in from outside. They can only have up to $500. They share that with a lot of other patients, taking them to the grill, and they can buy things by mail order: books, televisions, video game players and games, DVDs and CD players and discs, even jewelry and some clothing items that they're allowed. There is the potential here for the city to gain thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars from the purchases that are made by the patients at the hospital. While I have no way of knowing exactly how little or how large this amount would be for the city, nevertheless, there's an important principle at stake here. What AB 289 is attempting to do is to ensure that the city of Coalinga can tax the civil detainees at the state hospital while allowing them no say in who will determine how those monies are spent. This is taxation without representation, to put it succinctly, and that's one of the reasons why this country declared its independence. The bill, authored at the behest of the city of Coalinga, is profoundly un-American, both in its effect and in its intent. The city is trying to disenfranchise a group of its own citizens because they do not like the way that they voted in a city election. I recommend that the committee reject this bill. And, if I may add, there is a solution if they don't want the patients to participate in the city election, and that is to take that square mile that includes the prison and the hospital and remove it from the city. It's an outlier, but that would immediately drop the population of the city by 5,000 people. And I don't think they want to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any additional witnesses in opposition?
Evelyn Abuhassan, Disability Rights California. We align our comments with the ACLU. The outcome of an election shouldn't be the basis for changing a particular class's domicile. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and members. Nick Brokaw here on behalf of the California Public Defenders Association. Respectfully oppose this bill for the reasons stated by the ACLU. Thanks.
Thank you.
Darren Byington from Sacramento, and I oppose this bill.
Thank you.
My name is Robert Sterling, and I am an SVP. I have been out 15 years. I was released by jury trial in Contra Costa County 15 years ago. I represent a number of friends, people who have been SVPs at the hospital that started at Atascadero and are now transferred to Coalinga. I would just like to say, remember please that they're patients. They're not prisoners. They have rights. Those rights, some of them are to vote, and they are going to be where they are for the rest of their lives, most of them. So the idea that there's another residence or a place for them to go isn't real. So when you take away their right to vote, you take away many things that they might have.
Thank you.
Sherry Harlow, Sacramento County, also Axle Board member, and I oppose this bill.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Arx Kraylink. I'm from Woodland Hills, California, and I oppose this bill.
Thank you very much.
Michael Escobar, Sacramento County, and I'm also a registrant, and I know people at that hospital, and yeah, I oppose the bill.
Thank you.
Roger Hennicutt, businessman from Modesto. I strongly oppose this bill as un-American taxation without representation.
Thank you. Any additional witnesses in opposition? Seeing none. Oh, excuse me, sir.
Perfectly all right. My name is Howard Rook. I'm from Sacramento. I'm also a registrant, and I oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to bring it back to colleagues for any questions or comments. Vice Chair Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to express that I appreciate being able to talk briefly with the chair as well as some of the advocates from Coalinga, but of course want to make some of those points on record here in the public forum as well. And I do think that there's some potential alternatives to this as a bill. But one of the issues that I think has been brought up and should be kind of fleshed out a little bit is that according to the state hospitals, 1,058 of the sexually violent predators have been committed to Coalinga State Hospital since 2006, but only 220 or 20% have been released. So it appears that a vast majority of these persons will live at the hospital for a long time and probably for the rest of their lives. I think one of the testimonies was up to 95% of the folks may fit into this category. So the question I would pose is, why should they be required to vote in a precinct in which they no longer live and they are highly unlikely to return?
I believe that this measure is consistent with an action that this committee itself took just last month when it passed AB 2839, which has now cleared the Assembly floor as well, which requires the CDCR to provide information to the Citizens Redistricting Commission regarding the last known place of address of each inmate who is in a facility that is under the CDCR's control, so that the inmates can be counted in the community that they came from. If they're counted for the purposes of deciding who their elected representatives are, I believe that they can vote in that same domicile. If we as a state and this committee has taken that action, I believe that this is consistent with that previous measure.
And I appreciate the points on that, and that's a part of why I had actually argued in opposition to that particular bill, even though I recognize that it had passed. But specifically in this situation, voters in the Coalinga State Hospital are directly affected by local sales taxes when they buy goods in the hospital, as testified here in the convenience store, the restaurant, the copy center, and other businesses. Why shouldn't they be able to vote on a tax measure that directly affects how much they pay on those goods?
Well, I actually want to reference, if I can, the city council member's testimony. I thought it was powerful that our service members are not afforded this same opportunity, that they may have been housed in a community that passed a sales tax measure that they could not vote on, but they themselves will also have to pay for that tax. So I would align my comments in response to that question to the city council member's comments.
And I would respectfully see the difference between those in that someone who serves in a military base is in a much more temporary situation, whereas I think that in this situation, the testimony and the background has attested that folks, once they're living here, tend to live here.
Well, then maybe you'll allow me one
Sure.
further step, because the mayor's point shouldn't be lost, that we have a city in my county that really has done everything that the state has asked of it, that is attempting to, while we have many NIMBYisms, not in my backyard, we had a city that was willing and has housed a state hospital in our community. But this is a city that is struggling right now. Our hospital closed this week, and we're struggling as a city to retain the police officers and firefighters that are needed for our community to thrive. And we're trying to find solutions, and really would ask that members of this committee look at the fact that this is a district bill, one that will affect members from my community, and as their advocate, I'm trying to fight for all members of my community, and believe that this bill helps us to do that.
And I do appreciate that. One thing I was just reminded of that I think is important to be distinctive of is on a military base. Perhaps one of the reasons why a PX and other locations are so popular is because they don't have sales tax when they're on that federal military base. But I think another point that was brought up is very worth exploring in terms of potentially the overall approach to this issue. And that's that 20 years ago, the legislature actually was asked to pass a bill to grant the city of Coalinga special permission to annex a non-contiguous parcel of land that included the state prison, even though it was 4 miles away, in order to perhaps boost the population count for the city. And the Assembly floor analysis for that bill explained that a portion of both the vehicle license fund fees and the vehicle fuel taxes are allocated to cities on a per capita basis. And by annexing state correctional facilities and thereby bringing prison residents under the umbrella of the city's local population, the city would be entitled to a larger portion of these subventions. And that's something that I was very involved in when I worked for the County of Orange and saw how Orange County Public Works benefited from the population that they had and how individual cities benefited from the population they had. So Coalinga has benefited financially for the last 20 years from being able to count prisoners at the Pleasant Valley State Prison and patients from the Coalinga State Hospital in their population count. Having received the financial benefits of counting voters at the hospital as residents, why should the city now be allowed to treat them as non-residents without voting rights and take them off of the voter rolls and transfer them to other locations throughout the state just because political leadership does not like how they voted on a measure?
Well, I think that's an appropriate question. If we're looking at a timeline, though, I think it's important to recognize that the state hospital was not present when that annexation happened. And so, nor were the voting rights restored until the Superior Court had restored them in 2014. So we have two variables that have changed since that annexation. The second and more pressing concern in terms of the city was staring with their financial shortfalls. How do we address the issue that's before us? And they were trying to deal with this. Now, whether the city should unannex is a decision that the locals can make. What I want to say is that none of that would have happened in a timeline that would have been able to keep the police officers and firefighters that were needed for the city. That the timeline for the unannexation, if that was a choice they wished to pursue, would not have allowed them to retain those officers. And
Mr. Mayor, did you have a comment?
I absolutely did. I want to point out that you can look at things as benefits, but let's talk about the amount of public safety that's required when you have a state hospital and you have their relatives coming, and you have a prison and you have their relatives coming. And a lot of our community stated we didn't want either of these institutions coming because of the unintended consequences that come. I just checked, we get about $12,000 a year from those gas taxes and stuff like that that come through there. I would give that money up in a heartbeat, even though that we're not, this is my personal opinion, even though that we are in a horrible position debt-wise, but if it's the recommendation of this committee to de-annex that area, I would say that that's akin to gerrymandering on our side if we were to do that. We would be in the exact same boat. You'd be looking at us and saying, hey, why are you trying to cut these people out? So we're not going to be able to win for losing. And here's another thing that I would state about the state hospital being out there is that, as everyone has stated already, we took this on. Half of our citizens, I believe, didn't want this scenario. The state hospital gets a ton of its water, all of its water, from the city of Coalinga. What happens if they're no longer in the city? Where do they get their water when the state comes and says, hey, we need to cut out water funds and we need to take out for the drought? Our outlying businesses and areas were the first people that were cut off. Where are they going to get their water from? That's going to be another big scenario. I think the city and the citizens would definitely be into de-annexing that area. Listening to our citizens around, that could be an option. However, I think that we would like some kind of direction to do that, because if that was given to us, then it wouldn't be able to come back around and say that we were gerrymandering this situation. And I think that the patients that are out there actually do benefit from the services that we provide that we're no longer going to be able to provide. Because of the fact that our taxes failed, and because of the fact that the state decided not to deal with our hospital anymore, our citizens feel like that we were boondoggled into this. They said they would hire 60% of the people. There's about 30% of the people. They said the people would come to live here. Van pools by tax funds are taking people away from our community. This has not been a benefit to our community. I just want to point that out. I don't want anyone thinking that this is a benefit. This is not a benefit, except for the jobs and the opportunities from that. But guess what? When 30% of the people are only working local and the remainder of them are working elsewhere, That's not such a big benefit. And I would also like to point out that everyone that works there pays that sales tax. Everyone that comes through Coalinga pays that sales tax. So it's not taxation without representation. And a lot of these people that are actually there were there in lieu of a sentence. It's not like that they actually finished their stuff. So
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Chair, the last thing that I wanted to mention, I don't think the committee would really be in a position to make suggestions or directions, but I can make suggestions. One is this election that's in concern was a special election in an odd year. Obviously, it had very low turnout, except for one particular community that seemed to have over 55% turnout, which was the folks at the state hospital. So holding the election again in perhaps a regular general election or a regular primary election would actually have a broader range of participation by the people of Coalinga. And I think that that probably ought to be the first path for the city to look at. It could have been June 5th, but we're too late for the deadlines on that. But of course, November 6th is an opportunity. There questions were brought up in terms of the law and the domicile question and what really constitutes a domicile. That sounds like a question for the courts and a question for potential litigation by the city to settle that issue, which wouldn't need action by the state legislature. I know it wouldn't be popular with the majority within this body, but maybe having a discussion of, is it appropriate to have voting rights for felons who are sexually violent predators even after their sentences? Is it time for that kind of discussion? But I think that also one of the things that was brought up, and I'm glad that people are discussing this, is it appropriate to move forward with a disincorporation? If indeed this facility isn't part of the community, I would agree that you still have a situation of, if it's not a part of the city of Coalinga, it's a part of the county. They still would be represented by county supervisors, et cetera, in terms of their local government, especially since this parcel is not contiguous with the rest of the city of Coalinga. So with that, I think that there are other potential solutions and potential avenues to be able to address these concerns. But I do appreciate them, and I understand the struggle the community is having. And so I want to make sure that those who are advocates for this bill understand that I do understand their concerns.
1 second, sir. Thank you, Vice Chair Harper. You make sure that you have a chance to reply in a second, but I know we all have to be in 3 places at once. So, Mr. Calderon.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I struggle because I have two sides of this. The first side is I know who you are, Assemblymember Rambula. I know your heart. I know you're a good person. And I know that you are fighting for your community. And I know what it's like to have a district issue, because I brought bills up here that were important to me and nobody else because it only affected my district. And I know what that's like. The other thing is that I do know a little bit about this because I have a state hospital in my district metropolitan. And so part of the thing that I do struggle with is that we have not had a situation where the state hospital has swayed any election in the city of Norwalk. It's a pretty large city, though. And, I think these people are directly affected with the decisions that are being made in this city, and we have a lot of close elections all the time. And the city of Whittier is, for a good example, we needed a new library, and it was the Republican council members in the city of Whittier that actually put this up. Something that was difficult for them, but yet a lot of the Republican electorate that did show up to vote voted against it and ended up losing our bond in order to build a new library. And so a lot of times we have a lot of close elections, and I struggle with, is it fair to place it specifically on this hospital and the inmates at this, or the individuals at this hospital as being the ones responsible for swaying the election, when clearly it was an issue of getting more people out and more people to vote in support of the measure. And, if the city is in such a dire need of these resources, why wasn't it articulated or properly explain to the electorate that was voting to please show up, please vote, because we are in a dire situation. We are in a dire position. We do need this tax increase to get more people in support. Because I know communities, regardless of party representation, they do show up and they vote for things if they truly know that there's a problem and if there's a struggle that a particular community is having. So that's where I really struggle with this bill. I wanna give you an opportunity to continue to work on this issue. I'm more than happy to work with you on this issue because I do have a major state hospital in my district. But I just want to register those 2 cents. I do have to run for appropriations because I'm about to miss the committee, but I do thank you for working on behalf of your community.
Thank you. And if I may, I would agree, and it's hard having the mayor right here, but the city maybe should have run a better campaign. I don't think they understood that voting rights had been restored when the measure was put before the voters. And I also, if I can, just the timing was of utmost importance. They were really trying to. Thank you. Timing needed to happen before the officers were removed. And that was really the reason for the special election. It wasn't that that was the ideal time for us to have that conversation. It was the only time that we could have that discussion.
Thank you very much. Please.
I just would just like to add that in our 2014 election, where we did have the tax, we had I think 1,852 voters, and in the off year, where the only thing on there was this, we had 1,127. So I'd say we did a pretty good job of getting out there to our voters in an off year where we only had this one issue. But we're a disenfranchised population. We have a large Hispanic population that doesn't vote. We have a lot of people there that don't vote. It's very hard to get to these communities and to get them to vote, especially when the city cannot spend city money to actually promote this. All we can do is give information out. So I just want to let everyone know we did try. We will continue to try, and I thank you guys for listening to us.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank my seatmate for his efforts here. And I generally am inclined to give deference on district bills because there are all sorts of local dynamics that you are living and breathing that we are on this day is trying to catch up with. I'm struggling with the bill. The key question for me beyond the local dynamics is that one of a domicile, and I'm sorry that I came into the conversation a little late here. The concern I have is around the potential for disenfranchisement if we can't locate the previous community of origin. If there are unique situations where you can't positively identify where somebody originated, where they sort of had the most connection in a community of prior residents. So while I don't necessarily have a fundamental concern around that voting rights question about city of origin, I'm just concerned about the negative byproducts of somebody who is on the voter rolls right now, but because of their unique situation, they are no longer able to vote. So I just would ask that if the bill moves forward, and I'm certainly more than happy to work with you on kind of the untangling that question a little bit, I would just ask that you look at that, because I'm not comfortable voting for something that has a likelihood of disenfranchising people from the voting rolls. Okay, it's not so much the primary issue of where they vote. It's that ultimate result of somebody now not being able to weigh in on major issues. So I just ask that you, should the bill move forward today, look at the potential byproducts of what we're doing here.
If I may, we were quite intentional within the bill not to try to remove anyone's voting rights. All we were trying to do is have the last known address, the last known one, be what we consider as their domicile. And I think it's important to realize that those who are released don't get released into Coalinga or to Fresno County. They get released into their last known address, to their county of domicile. If we consider and replace and put them in those former places, why do we not allow them to vote in the homes and communities that they know better? They've never touched foot in Coalinga before they were placed at the state hospital. I struggled too, trying to come up with a solution, and really have come to the committee with an open mind to try to work with you and figure out how to strengthen this bill if it is allowed to continue past today.
Thank you, Dr. Weber.
Yes, I'm sorry I was stuck in another committee and just got out to come up here for this item. I too, like everyone else, struggles with this issue, primarily because I understand what we did with redistricting, and that was really a snap in time. But probably people change their should have the right to vote wherever they choose to vote most of the time. I'm sure most of us have had kids who've gone off to college and decide that they're going to keep their voting at their parents' house versus where they're currently living. They may change eventually, and so we've never had this this idea that you could be easily disenfranchised, especially a population. We're talking about a very specialized group of people that we can almost gerrymander out of a situation because we didn't like the outcome of a vote. And I think many of us have had communities or issues that have come forward that we didn't really like the outcome, but we didn't think about disenfranchising those folks and that community from being a part of the pot that's there. We just figured we had to work harder to get other folks out to vote or register more people or whatever it may be. And I know you've got a unique situation there, but at the same time, your city annexed these folks on to increase its population, for other reasons. And now, with that comes the good, the bad, and the ugly, and all in between. I mean, when you're really doing something like that. So I can't really support it because it seems so much like gerrymandering for one reason only, and a population at a hospital that we're going to basically disenfranchise or require them to vote somewhere else, or not allow them to register to vote in that city. I'm not sure if we've ever done that before in terms of not allowing a person to register to vote and to exercise that right to vote in that particular community. So I don't know if it sets a good precedent, a bad precedent for that to happen. I thank Mr. Harper for giving you some suggestions, because those are very good legal suggestions about what could happen if you think this is if this is not the nature of this city, and that the annexing of that group was not has not been beneficial. Where you would put them and those kinds of things is another whole situation. But I think it's kind of dangerous to kind of wade into this gerrymandering situation because of the outcome of a vote.
Thank you. Any additional? Yes, sir, please.
I just had one other thing. I was there when we did annex the state hospital in, and the prison, or not the prison, but the state hospital. And I remember that when people at the hospital were buying things, they weren't paying a local tax. They didn't have to pay the local tax. I don't know why, for that reason they did. But later on in the years that it followed, then they had to start paying it. I don't remember exactly what date it was, but they didn't pay local taxes when we first did it, and I have no answer why. But it does affect a lot of stuff. This council was going to earmark that money for EMS stuff, and with our hospital closing, that means our ambulance. We have 2 ambulances in the city of Coalinga, and most every day they're gone because we have a state hospital and we have a prison there, and that's who they utilize. First, they take a lot of people from the state prison and the state hospital. They take the patients from both, and they take them. The nearest place is Hanford, but most of the time they take them to Bakersfield. So we're 4 hours away with an ambulance every day. I mean, our guys, I was a volunteer ambulance guy, and I worked for the fire department for 38 years as a volunteer, and I was a volunteer captain, and I worked there for 38 years. And we've had a lot of people, but we just don't have that many people anymore. Mm-hmm. And we've tried, and we put the money into it, but it just doesn't come back. And a lot of times we're there with no ambulance at all. And the closest one is 20 miles away in Avenel. And so if somebody gets hurt, has a heart attack or something, we don't even have a hospital now. So that's what's hurting us so bad. That's why we're fighting this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no additional questions or comments, Dr. Arambula, would you like to close?
I would, and I appreciate the length and time that this committee has invested into this subject matter, and my colleagues for hearing us out. Our responsibility is to represent our communities, and I heard an outcry from mine asking for a solution to a problem. And it's the problem that we present to the committee without thinking that we have all the answers, and are willing to continue to work with the chair and this committee as if this bill is allowed to move forward. But do just want to restate, if I can, nowhere here are we trying to take away someone's right to vote. We're just trying to make sure that they are able to vote in a place where they have more ties to, that the communities that they came from, the homes that they grew up in, they understand their local dynamics. For us, in our local dynamics, Coalinga is the only city I have in my district that's decreasing in size. They have had a 25% reduction in their police force. Their hospital has closed down. And they really are looking to us as a state to recognize the commitments that they've made to house this state hospital and the prison in their backyards, and the effects and unintended consequences that come from that. With that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arambula, for your presentation today, and thank you for everybody who testified on both sides of a tough issue. And let me just first say that obviously, I admire and respect you, Dr. Arambula, and how hard you advocate for your district, and the respect that you have amongst all your colleagues when you come with tough issues. And I try, me and my committee staff spent a lot of time looking at this issue and trying to figure out, what changes could be made. It's a district issue that strikes at a fundamental principle. And that's what makes it hard. It's not a district issue in the sense of permission to build a building somewhere where you shouldn't, or where you don't have permission, or something like that. It comes down to voting rights. And our people who served their time for a crime they committed, and then are released from prison, but are housed in a state hospital where they get their voting rights back. Should we force them to vote in a place where they may never live again, and odds are will never live again, versus giving them the option of registering to vote where they live? And they have that option. My understanding is that when people go to the hospital, are released and they get their voting rights back, they can either register to vote where they came from, or they can register to vote at the hospital, and that's a decision that folks make there. I think that some good suggestions were made by Vice Chair Harper and others on possible solutions. Unfortunately, a solution that I personally am just not comfortable with is this idea that you force people to vote from a place that they came from but may never go back to again, and odds are won't ever go back to again. So I'm going to be laying off the bill, but I fully encourage my colleagues to vote however they see fit. And with that, Madam Secretary, will you please call the vote?
The motion is to pass. Berman?
Not voting.
Berman, not voting. Harper?
No.
Harper, no. Calderon? Aye. Calderon, aye. Lowe? Aye. Lowe, aye. Mullen? Aye. Mullen, aye. Steinorth?
Not voting.
Steinorth, not voting. Weber? Not voting. Weber, not voting.
Yeah. So that bill fails on a 3-1 vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Committee.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, you still have the consent calendar to vote on. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll for? Oh, but we need a motion in a second.
Second.
I've got a motion in 2 seconds.
Berman?
Aye.
Berman, aye. Harper?
Aye.
Harper, aye. Calderon?
Aye.
Calderon, aye. Lowe?
Aye.
Lowe, aye. Mullen? Aye. Mullen, aye. Steinorth? Steinorth, aye. Weber? Aye. Weber, aye. The consent calendar is out.
Thank you very much. The consent calendar is out. I think everyone's voted on everything, so that adjourns today's hearing. Thanks. That's tough, but like.